All right. I'd like to welcome Christine Zagrobelny. She's going to talk to us about open source and social justice. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming to this talk today. This is Community-Driven Development, Sustainable Open Source for Social Justice. I'm Christine Zagrobelny. I'm a volunteer with a really cool organization called the New Sanctuary Coalition, and I'm also a software developer. So today we'll talk about New Sanctuary Coalition's work, and we'll talk about how we built software to help them support their work following the 2016 election. And then we'll talk about how we're building a community to maintain the software and support New Sanctuary Coalition's other tech needs. So diving into a little bit of information about New Sanctuary Coalition. New Sanctuary Coalition is led by and for immigrants to stop the inhumane system of detentions and deportations in this country. Pictured center here, this is Ravi Ragbir. He's the founder and executive director of the New Sanctuary Coalition. And this picture was taken as he was walking into his check-in with ICE. And here he is also surrounded by the New Sanctuary Coalition community. So NSC has been around since 2007, and over those 12 years, they've developed many, many programs to support families and individuals who are resisting detention and deportation. So to give you a sense of what they do, I'll talk about just 4 of those programs now briefly. So the first program is the Accompaniment Program, which pairs undocumented people with trained volunteers to accompany them to their immigration hearings and check-ins with ICE. So when our friends, and friends is the term that New Sanctuary Coalition uses for our impacted community members. So when our friends have to check in with ICE, there are a few potential outcomes. They could be told to come back in a year or 6 months or 3 months. These are generally the best outcomes. They could be told to come back in a week or a couple days, or they could be detained on the spot. The photo I just showed of Ravi Ragbir on the previous slide was taken as he was walking into a check-in where he was detained for several weeks and almost deported. He was on the way to the airport. So the goal of the Accompaniment Program is to provide support. When you have a group of people who are there to wait with you, the amount of stress and anxiety you're feeling goes down. And when our friends in these situations have to advocate for themselves, whether they have to ask something of an ICE officer, whether they have to present their immigration case in front of a judge, it will be easier for them to fight for their rights with a group of people who are standing behind them to support them. And additionally, many of our friends' family members aren't able to come with them into a check-in, into an ICE facility, because their immigration status puts them at risk if they were to go into an ICE building. So the Accompaniment Program is also able to keep family members and NSC informed during the accompaniment so that we can jump into action if anything happens. The next program I'll talk about is the Pro Se Legal Clinic, which is a weekly clinic where friends work with a group with trained volunteers to plan for and understand their immigration case. So this image is one of our clinics in New York, and there are teams of generally 2 or 3 volunteers who are paired with a friend, and they're working on asylum applications, work authorization, any other applications that the friend will need to fight their immigration case, and they're supervised by volunteer attorneys. And the next program is the Anti-Detention Program, which works with detained immigrants across the U.S. and their families to fight for their release, and usually through a strategy that combines both the legal recourses available to the person and advocacy. So, for example, this image on the left, Baba Silla's family is calling for his release at a rally after he was unexpectedly detained at a check-in in January 2019. So the New Sanctuary Coalition community was able to support Baba through rallies, letter writing, calls to his deportation officer, and a social media campaign, while New Sanctuary Community Legal Defense was able to represent him as his lawyers. And on the right, Baba is reuniting with his family at the New Sanctuary Coalition offices. We also have a bond fund to help bond people out of immigration detention. And the last program that I'll talk about specifically is Sanctuary, which is a network of religious spaces that offer long-term and short-term physical sanctuary to friends. So if an immigrant is named as an actual target of deportation, they may decide to take physical sanctuary and live in a religious space for an indeterminate amount of time. It could be months, longer. And here, this is Amanda Morales, and she made the decision to take sanctuary in a church in Washington Heights. And on the left, she's with her children in the church space, and then on the right, she's surrounded by the church community in Washington Heights. So these are just 4 of the ways that New Sanctuary Coalition, works to fight detention and deportation. And now we can take a look at how technology helped them scale their work over these past 3 years. So immediately following the 2016 election, demand for New Sanctuary Coalition's programs was growing rapidly. There was a lot of fear. And there was also a large influx of new volunteers. And because of these 2 things, systems that had worked well in the past were not sustainable at this scale. For example, the Pro Se Legal Clinic, which was the second program that we talked about, before the election of 2016, there were about 4 friends who would attend clinic per week. Over a period of a couple months, that jumped up to 40. And then we had 100 volunteers, all in this in-person clinic per week, which means that there are 40 teams who are each working on their own asylum application with a friend, which New Sanctuary Coalition staff has to review weekly to see the work that they've done after clinic, in addition to keeping track of their asylum application deadlines, next court hearing, check-in. So all of that is complicated enough if every friend and every volunteer is able to come back to clinic every week for as many weeks as it takes to complete an asylum application or another application that they're working on. But of course, that's not realistic. So then you also need to be able to hand off work, sometimes work that hasn't been touched in 3 months and was worked on by other volunteers. And all of this, triaging cases and creating new teams to work together and handing off documents has to be completed in a small space as quickly as possible that's crammed with 150 people. And, because of these circumstances, the stakes are extremely high. You have 1 year to turn in an asylum application from the date that you enter the country, and you will not be able to apply for asylum if you don't turn it in within 1 year. And most people don't know that if they're applying for asylum. And the burden was, falling on the staff to just do everything that they could to try to prevent people from falling through the cracks without a system in place to manage or track all of this. And these numbers were bad enough, but they kept growing, and it was clear that this was not going to be sustainable. And, I spoke with the staff, and we, did a really strong evaluation of what New Sanctuary Coalition's needs were, and there wasn't any software on the market that met it at that time. So I started working on a scope of work for a Rails application. So I'll show you briefly some of the MVP functionality that address these problems. Of course, we wanted a central place for admins to be able to access digital records for each friend. Here they can, filter and search by different fields. They can edit these records, of course. Here they're adding activities, which are accompaniments, for ICE check-ins or court hearings, so that these can later show up on an accompaniment calendar and volunteers can RSVP to attend them. They can manage the documents, which are the work product of clinic, and download, review, upload new drafts of these documents. They can give specific clinic volunteers access to a very limited version of this record, so that those clinic volunteers, as soon as they're assigned access, they can view past drafts of the asylum application that they're working on, upload a new draft for the work that they've completed during that specific clinic, and view some basic information about the friend. And this is that volunteer view once they've been granted access. And for the accompaniment program, of course, volunteers can RSVP to attend an accompaniment. So they view a calendar where they have about 2 weeks of upcoming accompaniments, and they can sign up to accompany. So after we launched the software in August 2017, the programs were able to continue to grow with support from the software. So we were starting with around 10 friends at that time, and by summer 2019, we're organizing accompaniments for between 50 to 70 friends each week in New York. And likewise, by summer 2019, we're filling about 125 to 175 volunteer shifts for the accompaniment program in New York each week. And likewise with the Pro Se Legal Clinic, I mentioned, we had around 40 friends attending clinic weekly in August 2017. This spiked up to 150 friends in this spring, and New Sanctuary Coalition staff decided to restructure the clinic to try to keep it around 100, because that's really the ideal, sustainable, maintainable number. And we generally have around 300 volunteers at clinic each week in New York at this point. So now that we've just talked about what New Sanctuary Coalition's needs were and how the software was able to support them and the impact that that can have, I want to talk, of course, about the process of building the software as volunteer. And in reflecting on that, there were these 3 factors that, for myself as a volunteer, really make it or break it for my work. And they were, what understanding practically, what work needs to be done for any project to be successful, and 2, feeling motivated and connected to the community and the work as a volunteer, and why you're doing the work. And then, 3, understanding how to do the work successfully within a specific community, which relies on, understanding and living by the shared values of a community. And, I've seen these factors impact a lot of New Sanctuary Coalition volunteers, both who've done tech projects for them and non-tech projects for them over the past several years. So the first one, understanding on a practical level what work is going to be involved for the project to be successful, what will you have to do or provide. So the first 2, I think, are probably the most obvious. With requirements, I stumbled into some advantages in getting an accurate sense of requirements for the MVP, so I wanted to kind of share some of that. Since I was immersed in the work, I basically had 90% of the requirements, and I could just create wireframes and bring them to the staff and have them refine them before. I didn't have to have any discussions before that point. And, in the extreme time pressure of that moment and the chaos of that moment, I know it wouldn't have been possible to have all of the meetings and get the staff in the meetings to get to 0 to 100 in terms of understanding requirements. Also, being immersed in the work gave me a sense of what items were actually the highest priority, so I could more effectively scope things. And, it allowed me to see what aspects of the work had, been the same for a year or multiple years, and what aspects were new and more likely to change. And, since we've launched the MVP, we've, of course, built new features and changed the software, so in those cases, I wind up doing a lot more adjustment after the fact. If I'm building something for a program that they're not currently running or haven't been running very long but intend to. So now I've kind of pulled back and decided to try to be more strategic about only building things for work that they're currently doing, because they wind up running the program a little bit differently, or there are just things that you can't anticipate. So timeline, with this, we knew that the breaking point was coming, and realistically, a solution that was not ready within 3 months wasn't a viable solution. So that took a couple, options off the table, and it also meant that playing back into the requirements, the MVP scope had to be buildable within 3 months. So maintenance. Small, scrappy, nonprofits who are, doing the work on the ground probably just, don't know that software needs to be maintained. I don't think that's standard knowledge that we should expect. But as an engineer, like, I knew that if I built it, I would be on the hook to maintain it. And so this was definitely the biggest like factor in deciding to build the MVP. So as I was thinking about it, I was like, okay, I'm committing to maintain this for probably about 3 years, or, maybe more. And that means, X amount of time per week for feature requests and bug fixes and uptime and security issues and project management and QA. So obviously that's defining maintenance like really broadly, just to kind of mean everything that has to happen for software to be used long term. And we also see this with other New Sanctuary Coalition tech projects that don't involve building custom software. For out-of-the-box software, obviously you're not going to maintain their code, but they could need configurations changes down the line, that they're going to need support in making, or other things. So I think it's good to consider this for any type of tech project, and not just for projects that are custom software. And the last one, training and support, I really underestimated. I underestimated like how much time it would take, and I thought it was going to be more of a one-time thing versus an ongoing thing. So my strategy was like a combination of video demos and in-person training, and you add new features, so video demos you have to re-record them. They're not as useful anymore. With in-person training, new folks come in and have to be trained. It's also a little bit better than video demos, because if a video demo is an hour, they're probably not going to watch it. And staff members just might not touch features for a while and might forget that they're there or forget how they're used. So refresher trainings were also really important, even if they're not like new staff members, because there have been many times when staff members have come up to me and said like, it would be really awesome if the software could do this. And I'm like, oh, it can. I'm just, they're constantly reminding me that if, they don't know how to use features in the software, they're not going to be able to use them. So this one has been really critical for the software to be successful. And obviously these things apply pretty directly if you're working with an organization one-on-one and you're kind of leading the project. But I think also if you're like working on an existing project as a contributor, maybe there are some areas, particularly around like maintenance, training, and support, that are lower visibility, but they have a high impact on the users being able to actually use the software. And maybe there's ways that you can see those and support in some of those areas. So the next factor that I think was pretty make it or break it for this project was why. For me, the motivation for me came externally. It came from just being part of the community, from seeing the urgency of the work firsthand over the course of several years, and seeing all of these community members step up and meet challenges on a daily basis. We have a couple email lists, and like multiple times a day, we just get an email saying like, hey, can anyone like drive someone from who just got released from a detention center in New Jersey? They need a ride to wherever. And like within 5 minutes, someone's like, we got someone. We got someone to do that. And being part of that community and seeing that on a regular basis is incredibly motivating. And working alongside friends who are preparing their asylum application and staff members who are juggling all of this and really have the hardest job in the world, and people depending on you to do all of these things, and just caring about the community and the people in it. And so if you're working on a tech project in collaboration with an organization, like, I encourage you to try to be part of the community, and to find ways to be part of the community, because you can't really fake motivation and connection to the community to yourself, and it's so important to be able to do this work in a sustained way. And the last of the factors that I found to be really critical is, how are you doing the work? Your mindset and how you view the work you are doing is going to impact, the way you interact with everyone. And these values up here, they were developed for volunteers at the Pro Se Legal Clinic. So I kind of took them from there after I realized how much they were impacting me and how much they were impacting the way that we structured our the community that we built to sustain the software. And I think many of them are transferable to volunteer work with other organizations as well. So first, no ego. It's not about us as volunteers. No drama. Our friends have enough without us adding to it. The staff as well, again, have the hardest job in the world. They're dealing with emergencies on a daily basis. And it's really important to, just empathize with the challenges that they are facing. And two, no savior complexes. As volunteers at New Sanctuary Coalition, we are standing in solidarity with people who have more courage than most of us will ever have. When our friends argue a case in front of an immigration judge, when they walk into a check-in not knowing if they're going to come back out, when they are imprisoned for months or years fighting deportation, they are putting their body on the line for their right and the right of others to live in dignity. And so they are leading this movement, and we, as volunteers, are standing behind them. And in any of the organizations that you work with, it's really important that you take leadership from impacted community members. Problem solve. As technologists, we have this really broad knowledge and perspective on technology, which can actually be really useful in solving problems. And the important work isn't the sexy work. And it might not be the work that uses what you think of as your most valuable skills. For example, supporting a migration to G Suite is not sexy. But if staff are losing tons of important emails from lawyers and funders to spam, it might be the most important work in that moment. Helping someone get set up with a password manager is not going to use design or programming skills, but it's really critical to protect the community. So in addition to those things, which have definitely happened for New Sanctuary Coalition over the past couple of years due to tech volunteers, we've had tech volunteers maintain, redesign, and then ultimately migrate New Sanctuary Coalition's static information site, re-image donated laptops, set up a volunteer management CRM, which has allowed them to accept donations securely and set up RSVPs to trainings, and send segmented email and send bulk email to volunteers and donors. So all of this stuff obviously has a huge impact on New Sanctuary Coalition's ability to do all of this work. And it's really important to learn and respect your own boundaries and limits, and how much you can commit to, because not doing that will hurt you, and ultimately it will also hurt the organization that you're working with. And total communication, personally, I think there's so much to be said for being in person with an organization, because you learn how an organization works. You learn who you need to talk to and what's the best way to communicate with them. And you're doing all of that and gathering all of that knowledge without having to place the burden on overtaxed staff and organizers to provide you with that sort of information. And it's also a really great way to build mutual trust being in person. So on top of those three factors, which were really important on an individual basis, my other big takeaway was, figuring out how to build a community to support this software and to support New Sanctuary Coalition's other tech needs. And that's definitely been a journey. It didn't start out that way. So how did the software get built? Well, in summer 2017, I did a 3-month sprint to get to the MVP. That's that first little hill there in July. And to do that, my company has summer Fridays, so I did half-day Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and then 2 nights during the week for about 2.5 months. And on Sunday nights, a couple other radical coders and I would get together and hack on the project for a couple hours, which was a huge morale boost. So then, of course, launched it, and then I hit some post-launch burnout for several months. And I was like, I want to get other contributors involved to make this project sustainable. And so I was like, okay, hack events. I can get contributors at hack events. So in December 2017, the project was featured in its first hack day, Progressive Hack Night in New York. And to prepare for hack events, I did a lot of the things that I thought were necessary for first-time contributors, like easy setup, README, seed data. It also really impacted the way I wrote issues because I didn't know the experience level of contributors, and I knew that they wouldn't be familiar with the software, and having unusable work and a lot of wasted time going back and forth about miscommunication, really sucks. So we just started writing really prescriptive issues, and they're really detailed and included a lot of specific implementation details, but I figured this was a really good investment to eventually get long-term contributors. But then, heading into summer 2018, we needed to make the app multi-tenant, which meant huge architecture changes. We also had to add some functionality for clinics to be used by clinics who were located outside of New York. So I completed that work in a couple different stages. The first was a solo sprint to do the multi-tenant stuff, and then the project was at a hack event called Ruby for Good, which is a multi-day hack event. So there was a team of engineers all working on it together, and we worked on a lot of the remote clinic stuff there, and then there was a final solo sprint to kind of get everything merged and deployed and finished, and then of course I was burnt out again for a while. So I started kind of realizing that even though I'd done several hack events at this point, which was, what I was thinking was going to get me contributors, I wasn't really reaching my goal to make the project more sustainable because I'd been putting all of this effort into making the project work really well for hack events, but I hadn't been putting any effort to maintaining or to retaining contributors after the event. So I started, thinking more about what motivated me and what motivated, my other two contributors who had started to contribute more regularly for over the past year, Tasha and Russell. What motivated them. And I've mentioned before that I've been really motivated by the community, and that is also true of many of the other volunteers who've done tech work and other volunteer work for New Sanctuary Coalition. But there were, many different aspects of working in a community that were motivating, and I wanted contributors to experience these different aspects. So, as part of their work on this project, and the first one is having a connection to the work. So the first thing I realized was that Tasha and Russell had been working on this project for a year, and they hadn't seen any of the work in person. They hadn't been to clinic, they hadn't seen accompaniment, they hadn't seen the software being used in person. So the first thing I did was, make sure to invite them, get them to clinic as soon as possible. They don't live in New York, so it was, actually a thing. And, decided that would be something going forward where frequent contributors, I would, get them in to visit clinic and see how everything works. And also, building community takes time. Building a connection to the work takes time. I'd been volunteering for about 3 years before I started working on the software. And, during that time, I didn't always volunteer regularly, but I kept getting email updates from New Sanctuary Coalition, and I kept coming back. And eventually, I became part of the community. And I realized that one thing I had done over the past year or so was just keep Tasha and Russell in the loop about what's going on at New Sanctuary Coalition, which wasn't that hard because they're my friends and current and former coworkers. So it was just something that would come up. And, I realized it was important for all contributors to the software to hear about what New Sanctuary Coalition, New Sanctuary Coalition's work on a regular basis, so that, over time they can feel increasingly invested in the work. So I started a monthly newsletter, update on New Sanctuary Coalition's work, and on a couple other things that we'll talk about. I also now, work hard to describe the real world need in GitHub issues. So I'll typically start a GitHub issue on the project with a background header, and then I'll just try to lay out exactly what would be better for New Sanctuary Coalition if this issue is completed, and make it more concrete. And the second aspect of community that was really motivating me was, working together, whether it was, during the first MVP build, those couple hours on a Sunday hacking with some radical coders, or whether it was one of the hack events that were so energizing, meeting new people and them being invested in the project and working on it, and as well as, being in person as a volunteer with New Sanctuary Coalition and working on asylum applications and, sitting and waiting for, accompaniments. And so what I wanted to do is, to make sure that working together could be something that would happen on an ongoing basis for this New Sanctuary Coalition tech community. So we have a, virtual co-working session each month. And we also I'm working really hard to do, shout outs both in the tech newsletter about all of the work that we've done this month, and, who has done the work and what impact that's had, and also to include, in code reviews and newsletter shout outs, because this is something that the New Sanctuary Coalition staff has always been really incredible about, showing, letting me and other volunteers know about the impact of the work. So I'm, working to replicate that and pass that on in our community. And, lastly, in working together, previewing the current and upcoming work, so that volunteers have, regular opportunities, regular invitations to be part of the community, as I did over the past several years. And the last aspect of community that I wanted to make sure that it was felt by everyone who's working with New Sanctuary Coalition tech projects is our shared values and goals. And it's of course important to incorporate New Sanctuary Coalition's values and mission into our open source code of conduct. That was an important step. But I've recognized that there are many small ways in the ways that we interact and prioritize work that are drawn from the values and goals. And one in particular, it's shaped the choices that we've made for the tech community, specifically the decision to include all tech volunteers, whether you're an open source contributor or you've worked on another tech project for NSC or a combination. Because the important work isn't the sexy work, and if our goal is to support New Sanctuary Coalition's needs, then it's important to include all of the projects and occasionally prioritize across them and include a lot of different skills, not just Ruby and Rails. Because open source PRs are pretty visible, and some of this other work is not as visible, but everything is really critical, and it should all be equally visible. So, to sum up, I hope that you can, go out and find the organizations in your community that are doing incredible work on the ground with very few resources. Find those organizations that are they're really working for social justice, and be part of the community first. Problem solve big problems or small problems, whatever is actually getting in the way of them getting the work done that they need to, and invest in community, because community, whether it's whether you're working on a tech project or whether you're organizing, whether in any field, that's the only way that this work is going to be sustainable over time. So, thank you. I have some links for you. You can learn about New Sanctuary Coalition. You can support New Sanctuary Coalition. You can donate to help them with their core services. You can donate to the bond fund. You can contribute to the open source project, and you can join the New Sanctuary Coalition tech community and the newsletter by shooting me an email. And I'll be around after this out in the hall and for the rest of the conference, and I would love to chat with you about any of this. Thank you.